Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for coming to our Embracing Accelerated Applications with Kubernetes webinar. My name is Shamila Wajirkuma, but everyone calls me Sam, and I'm one of the VPs at Veriday, and today you will have an amazing experience with the CEO of Entando, who will be talking a little bit about what happens with micro front-end platforms and how to speed things up. It's definitely a world of microwave time, and Entando is great at helping create that microwave time if you're using Kubernetes. And so we'll be talking a little bit about that. Sam Hyland will be doing a little presentation, and then we'll have a panel discussion. So what I'd like to do first off, though, is make sure that we understand a little bit about you guys. So I'd like to start with a couple of polling questions that I hope you can answer. Eric's going to put up the first one. So, what cloud service are you using to modernize apps in the cloud using Kubernetes? So we see a lot of folks with OpenShift, some with Google GKE, others with Amazon AKS, Amazon is EKS, Azure AKS, and we also have a lot of folks who haven't yet started. So where would you fall if you could just please take the poll? We see a lot of interest these days in modernizing, particularly Kubernetes is not the easiest to actually put micro front ends on top of without some tools. And so it's very interesting to see how people are using that. Great. Well, most people are using OpenShift, followed largely by folks who haven't started yet. And that's great because that's what we're here to talk about today, is what might it look like to begin and how do you go about doing that. And so onward to the next poll question, Eric. How difficult is it for you to extend DevOps into the front end? So the choices are impossible, difficult, you're slowly making progress, easy, or already in place. So not wanting to sort of tip the hand, I have to say that for the most part, I very rarely hear easy as the answer to this question, but I look forward to seeing how you guys have figured it out. A few stragglers, just waiting for everyone to answer. Okay, 5 more seconds. Wow, yeah, slowly making progress. Definitely. I definitely hear that. We hear a lot of impossible and difficult, and this is some of the things we're going to talk about today. Why is it so difficult, and how can it be significantly easier? And lastly, from a user experience standpoint, it's increasingly becoming the competitive differentiation. Do you see that? I know we have a whole UX UI practice that will tell you for sure that it is really competitive differentiation. But you have some other options here. Accelerate innovations faster from idea to production. Build applications in teams with a single application. Allow multiple frameworks or languages with the same UX. Or reuse UX elements to create standard usability across apps. Give everyone a couple more. I know UX is such a hot topic these days, and it's interesting to see how different people think about it when they're planning out a project. Some put design thinking and UX at the top of the list, and others we see just a ton of, well, I'll do it later. And then they realize that they could actually save a lot of money by doing it now. This is an interesting split. Reuse UX elements to create standard usability across apps, or accelerate innovations, faster time from idea to production. And it's interesting because it's a big split between that to the nearest middle pieces, which also tied. So very, very interesting. But without further ado, so you guys can learn a little bit more about how we would do this, I'm going to hand off to Paul Hines, who is the CEO of Entando. Entando and Veriday are partners here in North America, and we're very looking forward to seeing how we can serve all of you. So Paul, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sam. And it was a good poll. Those are some of the things we're seeing, and actually the things that our customers are kind of asking about. And if you know my background, I had a lot of experience back in Red Hat, but even before that, for the past 20 years, I've had a lot of experience in open source. And an interesting thing that I've observed over the last many years was, or in the past, was the concept of what does it mean to be lightweight? And the reason for that question was there was a trend towards open source. There was a trend towards easier to use software, and the term lightweight got used a lot. But not everybody understood what it meant, or they had different understandings of that. So it could mean lightweight could mean it was easy to install, or lightweight could mean less memory requirements, or it could be just easier to use. But lightweight became kind of a goal for a lot of applications. And if you wanted to grow a new product, especially in open source, it needed to be quote unquote lightweight. Well, a new term for us in enterprise IT is cloud native or modular, or actually more specific to today, it's Kube native or Kubernetes native. So what we want to do today is kind of give some of the descriptions for what that means. What does it mean to build applications on top of Kubernetes? And instead of them being a monolith in Kubernetes, what does it mean to be a Kubernetes native application? And so with that, there's also a new term that's come out, which is micro front ends. So as microservices came out to kind of allow modular development for applications, that really helped to kind of resolve the back end of applications, but the front end still remained a big monolith. So Martin Fowler, who did define microservices, later defined micro front ends. And so with micro front ends, we now have the ability to kind of do that Kubernetes native or containerized modular services all across your application. So that's what we wanted to talk about today. What does it mean to be Kubernetes native, which is hard to say? And then what does it mean to be modular, and kind of to unify the front end and back end in that modular architecture. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you guys to give a review of that.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks so much, Paul. Sorry, I was going to introduce you, Sam, but you beat me to it, so go ahead.
I'll turn it over to Sam. That would have been a good handoff.
All right. Thanks, Sam and Paul. So my name's Sam Hyland, and I'm one of the technical architects at Veriday. And when I was asked to give this talk, I really want to dive into how we build applications at Veriday and how we really came to Kubernetes and micro front ends as a solution for building those applications. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of a journey. And we started, building applications. There's two ways we can really build our applications. We can build our applications as a monolith. And that's the way a lot of applications have been built in the software world. So we build everything under one big tent. We deploy it all together. If we're building an application that combines, say, payments and mapping, both of those pieces of functionality will be part of the same application deployed together. As we implement it, we might try to implement some loose coupling inside it, but it's difficult to do, and those barriers break down over time. The other approach we can take is a service or microservice-based approach, and I'll be honest, when I first heard about microservices, 7, 8 years ago, I was a little bit skeptical in that I thought they were solving a problem that our customers weren't necessarily facing. I thought they were solving primarily a problem around scale And the micro and the microservice really pushed me into thinking that we were building tiny little services. And over time, as I thought about and I did some reading on what makes effective software development teams, what enables the rapid develop, a high-performing organization, I realized that a lot of the capabilities that a high-performing organization have are a lot easier to deliver when we take a microservice-based approach. So things like having a loosely coupled architecture, being able to deploy frequently with a lightweight change process, giving our teams greater autonomy. These are all things that really drive high-performing teams, and they're a lot easier to do with microservices. And I hope I'll show you that as we go through this talk. So Martin Fowler, as Paul was mentioning, really defined the concept of microservices, and he introduced these 9 key characteristics of microservices. And he's done great talks on them. I'm not going to go through all 9 of them, but I'm going to point specifically at the second item here. So when we're building effective microservices, we're organizing those services and we're organizing those teams around our business capabilities. And I think Martin said something to the extent that these microservices are small in terms of team, not small in terms of code. So we have a small, tightly knit team building out these services effectively and efficiently. And if I think about how software was traditionally built, we have our technology-driven teams. So we have a front-end team, we have a back-end team, and we have a database team all working somewhat independently. And if the front-end team needs to make a change, they have to coordinate with the back-end team. And sometimes that can be a painful process. Sometimes the back-end team is facing a backlog or they have other priorities. So coordinating those changes can take time. There's meetings, there's communication overhead. And inevitably what happens is at some point, someone on the front-end team is going to say, well, I'm going to implement some logic inside the front end just to get things done. And then you end up with your logic split between the different pieces. So you end up with business logic in the front end, you end up with business logic in the back end, and it becomes a maintenance nightmare over time. You're also tightly coupling the deployment of each of these individual pieces. So that back end team that's working on your payment system and also working on your mapping system, but when we need to push a change to the mapping component, we also need to make sure that that payment component is ready to go, or we need to manage it through feature flags or through branching or other mechanisms. And it's just more overhead. It slows things down. The other thing is when everything is tightly tied together in the same backend, you've got the same team working on it, the team doesn't have as much autonomy as I'd like to give them to make decisions. So that backend might all be implemented in Java. Maybe we're implementing a machine learning component. The best language for that is Python, because maybe there's more libraries and frameworks available for us to work with. And it becomes a difficult decision in how we're going to integrate and tie all those pieces together. So what we'd really like to do is tie our backend and structure our teams not around technology, but around the business capability. So if our business capability is payments, if our business capability is mapping, let's build out a payments team and let's bring business users into that team as well. So it's not just our front end, back end, and persistence developers, but we also have people working tightly who know payments within our organization or know mapping within our organization, integrated as part of those teams, working together to deliver our software seamlessly. And they can really say when it's ready to go as well too. So with a service-based approach, we can push out that payments component separately from the mapping component. So that's why I really want to see the teams driven around the services. Now, once we enable that technological autonomy, we need a way to package that. And the answer here really is containers. So I always make a parallel between containers in the software world and containers in the shipping world. And if you haven't read about how shipping containers revolutionized the delivery of goods throughout the world, I really recommend you take a dive into it. Before we had to, if we want to ship bananas or ship a car, those things got loaded onto a boat, offloaded onto a boat, and then loaded onto trains or other mechanisms to transport them throughout the world. And you had a small army managing the shipment of goods, managing how bananas got packed onto a ship. Once the shipping world standardized on containers, they were able to automate that. And just like the shipping world has managed to do that, we're doing the same thing in the software world. So if we have a component that is being written in Python and a service that is being written in Java, we can manage both of those through containers and present them as a unit to our infrastructure team that can manage those pieces independently. That's really where some of that DevOps thinking comes in. Now, what is managing those containers? That's where we get to Kubernetes. So Kubernetes is really the choice for managing your services and managing your containers. If you look at the Google Trends, you can see it is far and away the market leader. Everyone else in that place is kind of dwarfed by the success of Kubernetes. It has a strong community behind it. It's extensible and innovative. And so as needs have changed, as for example, years ago when enterprises started to adopt Kubernetes, that community stepped in and built out capabilities that enterprises needed and continues to build and improve Kubernetes, giving us everything that we need, keeping us current. I also like Kubernetes because we're really managing our infrastructure as data, which means that infrastructure can be checked into source control systems. We can track when it's being changed, who's changing it, when it's changing. If we're really lucky, we might see some notes about why that's being changed. So by managing our infrastructure as data, we're able to deploy our infrastructure, so to speak. So if we need to push 2 servers, we update a configuration file, we get 2 new servers, we know what's happening, why it's happening. All of this really lets us streamline now our release and deployment process. So Kubernetes becomes the platform that all our applications and services are running. So we're taking a microservice-based approach to building out our applications. Our applications are being packaged inside containers, and DevOps is taking care of our containers. So we're taking a DevOps approach to building our applications, containerizing our applications. The infrastructure people are basically managing the hardware, providing a Kubernetes layer for us to run on. If we're running on one of the big cloud providers, they're taking care of it for us. And all of that change tracking, all of the infrastructure being managed in configuration files lets us get to a continuous deployment environment much easier than we could if we were deploying traditional monolith-based applications. And that picture there is from Guadalajara, Mexico, when they actually had to move a telephone building to accommodate a widening of the street. It would have taken a week's outage for them to move that building. They avoided it by keeping all the wires connected. And I really look at that and look at them moving a building, keeping everything connected. And I think of how easy we have it now with tools like Kubernetes, with a service-based approach, and how easy it is compared to then to keep things up and running as we go, as we make changes in the software world. That gets us so far. What I've been talking about so far, state of the art 5, 6, 7 years ago, when everyone was taking this microservices approach, people were starting to be introduced to it. The problem is the front end of our application was still often being implemented as a monolith. So we ended up with this case where we could, separate our services. We could have our services tightly aligned with our business units. But on the front end side, we still had one monolith that had to be deployed together. We didn't have that loose coupling between the different pieces. So our team wasn't as effective as it could be. This is where micro front ends and Entando come in, because they let us split that front end up into separate components, separate micro front ends, much as we have our services split up into microservices. So we can now deploy our front ends independently. We can have teams working on our front ends independently and autonomously, working together with the service team, working together with the business unit, without stepping on the toes of other people working on other areas of the front end. What does that look like? If we look at kind of a diagram of a page, we have a page here on a website, and we have multiple front ends, micro front ends sitting on that page. So maybe that one at the top was that payment service I was talking about. Maybe that green one in the lower left is tied into the mapping piece. And we might have some content coming from the content management component inside Entando sitting on the page as well too. By splitting these up into those separate front ends, the big piece here is we have separate teams able to work on each of those front ends. Aligned with those units, they're able to deploy and release autonomously. So if team 1 is that mapping application, instead of having to coordinate with team 2 and coordinate with the release team and having to go through a cumbersome release process to get the front end out, they can now take that same approach we're taking on the back end with microservices and push those front end changes out independently and autonomously without worrying too much about stepping on the toes of team 2, which might be coordinating. some machine learning or search components, or team 3, which might be working on a payments component. This is kind of that technological autonomy as well. So just like we have autonomy in the back end when we're implementing our microservices, some might be implemented in Python, some in Rust, some in Java, some in Go. We can do the same thing on the front end if we need to. So in this diagram, you can see, we've got one micro front end written in Vue, another in React, another in Angular. So we can give that autonomy to our teams if we need to. Maybe 95% of our application is written in React, but there's one small piece, one component that for whatever reason, Vue is the best choice for that component. Maybe it's coming from something else and we need to bring that in. A micro front end approach lets us do that. And then I'm going to just kind of close up on this diagram and then get to some results, and we can get into a group discussion. This is just looking again and kind of bringing everything together and showing that we can really take that DevOps approach with our front end and our back end when we bring in a micro front end framework like Entando. So we have our entire application, all our front ends, our API gateway, maybe from some back ends for front ends, our microservices all running inside Kubernetes. Everything is Kubernetes native. We've got our microservices running independently. We've got our front end components running independently. We can deploy each of these, provide continual updates. And there's these faint white lines around those verticals that you can see as well too. So we can really align vertically with the business, our front end, the services that support that front end, and really get that all those benefits that come with that. Some of the just key takeaways from this I want to highlight before we move into the discussion phase. So by moving to micro front ends, moving to microservices, you really can align your product development and your software architecture to those business capabilities. You get a loosely coupled architecture, so each piece is independent. We can deploy each piece independently. Each piece is resilient, scalable, highly available. The teams are empowered, and empowered teams are happy teams, are productive teams. So those empowered teams can do the work they need to in the different areas. And we can support fast, frequent deployments of each of those components, really enabling a highly productive organization. So thank you. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to the other Sam, who will get us kicked off on our discussion. Thank you. Oh, I think I can't hear Sam. I'm not sure if anyone else can hear her. I'm sorry, I think we might be having some audio problems. It's a discussion of one right now.
I can hear you, Sam, so it's at least two of us.
All right. I think we need a moderator to facilitate this.
Unmute. Ah, so now I'm unmuted. Did Sam get unmuted? It took me a while to click the unmute.
I'm unmuted now as well. Sam, can you try to unmute? I believe you should have the ability now.
Nope. All right. Okay. Otherwise, you want me to do the panel questions?
Is our moderator not on?
Oh, so maybe have to be a moderator. I can find the panel questions.
Shamila, it says you're self-muted. Can you try one more time?
You have to click 3 times, I think. I did. I clicked it, it didn't do it. Otherwise, let me do I can do a couple questions because Sam and I talked about the panel questions. So is that the next part, Sam? Sam Highland?
I believe so. Yeah, I think we're getting into the panel discussion now.
Let me do that then. Let me do that if that works, and then we'll get Sharmila unmuted. So one, especially for all the teams that have, actually you've been building projects for customers. It's about this new thing of micro front ends. I mean, it's not completely new. Martin Fowler did define it. He defined it after the definition of microservices. And he did it because of, the great success of microservices and seeing how that could be extended. But the question that we had pre-prepared for the panel was, what have you seen as the business values of implementing micro front ends on Kubernetes? And Sam, I think you mentioned a couple, but would you want to expand on that?
Yeah, so some of the values I really see as key for kind of putting micro front ends on microservices is, first of all, it's an expansion of the concept, right? So we're expanding the concept that came into play with microservices to micro front ends. And some of those key pieces, one is, when we're deploying our application, we want to be able to deploy individual pieces without impacting other areas of our application. So, I can count, hundreds of times where we have had a case where, some great feature that the business wants is ready to go, development's complete, but because it was implemented using a monolithic approach on the front end, we had to hold up and we had to wait. And sometimes, you're waiting multiple weeks, business is wondering what the holdup is, and it's because there's bugs or issues in other areas that piece is really tightly coupled to. So by separating those out into separate components, separate micro front ends, we now can push that area of the application out without impacting other areas. The other piece really comes into play when we're talking about kind of our different business units and our key stakeholders. So we can work in an agile process, we can engage business stakeholders when we're working on a monolith, but when we can really segment out the separate parts of that application, both on the front end and the back end, we can engage the right users in the right area of the application, and the development and the implementation of that application aligns with the stakeholders that we're engaging. So they don't need to worry too much about, well, that guy over in payments wants this and we're bottlenecked here, or how's it going to impact us if we make that change? We can work and we can deliver what the different business units need directly. And Nick and Nathan, if you have anything to add, please jump in.
Yeah, I think for me, just to kind of add on to kind of what Sam was talking about, I think the real value is being able to deliver really great user experience. I think in today's market, how competitive everybody is and trying to find differentiators, companies and organizations are investing a ton of resources into driving good user experience. And to do that, I think one of the things that most UI UX team will tell you is that you got to understand and learn over time what your user wants. You can't go into it with an expectation that you know what the ultimate answer is. And so, you get the need to do things like A/B testing, continue to monitor user behavior, and be able to adjust, right? User and consumer behavior changes all the time. And so the ability to have a technology and a technology stack that allows you to take advantage of it, all the things that Sam was pointing during his presentation around, being able to deliver features more quickly, being able to do that in support of real business value, driving, whether it's increase e-commerce or increase adoption, whatever it is that that the customer is trying to do, having technology that supports iterative development, iterative changes, supporting A/B testing. These are all key capabilities that drive business value. And so having applications and having technologies that are, whether they're Kube native or, in line with kind of the microservices, micro front end, really does help deliver those capabilities to the organization.
I'll throw in one more answer in there as well. So we're talking about agility in some sense, right? One of the promises of modularity and using components and all that, right? But there's also an element of agility for the organization. So I've had clients who the business comes in with a great idea, and they happen to have a team of, say, 12 developers. They're all Angular aces, and they're in Dublin, Ireland, and they're available. But my monolith doesn't do Angular, right? So the advantage of an MFE architecture is I I'm not tied to one front-end technology. I don't have to have my entire enterprise coupled to, hey, we're a React shop or we're an Angular shop. I can choose to, and you can argue, the architects can argue, do I want to have 3 Vue technologies for MFEs? That's a separate conversation, but I would have the ability to be nimble and say, I've got a team, they've got capacity, I can redirect them to this project, and we can quickly put together a micro front end that will deliver this brand new product or this brand new feature application. I can tie it together in an application, right? That agility in an organizational sense can be really powerful, especially in the front end space, which in my opinion has changed so much in the last few years, right? There's always a new technology, there's always a new plugin or a new framework people want to try, and it lets you try those out in something like the A/B testing thing that Nick was talking about. I can try something, I can throw it away if it doesn't work. I can put Rust in the back end, I can put Angular up front, I can switch to Vue. You have that flexibility to say we can choose best of breed wherever it needs to be in the architecture.
Okay, so I think there's 5 things we can explore, like with the concept of gathering requirements to then doing the initial build and then the full application lifecycle management with this concept. So back in that design and kind of the requirement gathering and innovation, is micro front ends and doing the architecture this way change how you build your teams? Like, do you build these independent teams that they each have their own mission? So here's what they're going to build today, but then they also have a mission, which is to continue to iterate on that. Does it change that concept of how you build and manage your teams over time on a single application? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think I'll start. I think what I've, across kind of all the clients that we work with, we've of course been engaged with clients that have been very successful at adopting, whether it's the agile process or microservices technology, and we've also worked with some clients that have struggled through that transformation. And I think one of there are a lot of common threads, I guess, that kind of persist across the organizations that have done it well. But just to kind of key back onto your question, I think one of the things that we've seen, one of the common factors that are kind of the same across organizations that have been successful is that they've embraced this from a cultural perspective, right? It is a cultural change within organization. You're looking at organizing your teams, organizing your technology teams, your business teams, your UI UX team, your testing team. The way you view it is very different than if you're building monoliths. I go back to containers are great, but if you want to deploy a monolith into a container, you could, but why, right?
Yeah.
So it's the same. To me, it's the same analogy for adopting microservices and micro front end. You really do have to understand that you're not going to really truly get the real value out of it without really adopting the cultural impact or the cultural change that comes along with it. And to kind of key back on the points that Nathan and Sam were talking around being able to enable different teams to kind of do what they need to do, being able to organize around service teams to deliver features and functionality. I do believe that where we've seen organizations that have really been really successful at adopting this technology, they've also they've adopted the cultural impact of it as well and made changes within the organization to take advantage of it.
So guys, my apologies because apparently my camera will not be working, but I did manage to come back in and just was seeing some questions coming in around, if I already have JHipster, then kind of where does Entando fit in and why do I need it?
If you want, or I can take it.
Sure.
So one of the concepts with Entando, Entando brands itself as a micro front-end platform for Kubernetes. Basically, you can build an application with Angular alone, but if you do that, you end up with one big monolith. And how do you break it up into those different components, those different teams, and properly manage the build process and the application lifecycle management updates? Well, one of the tools that comes with it is essentially Entando's implementation of JHipster. JHipster is a really good tool. We know the team leads on it, and it allows you to quickly build a skeleton for a component that would become a micro front end and microservice backend. So you can do that, but the implementation we have is specific to making it into Entando. So you can use all your existing skills with JHipster and all the capabilities, And we've just built what's called a JHipster blueprint for Entando for that. So it's a little bit extra. Nathan can add more, but it's kind of cool because it's kind of a side tool to just quickly generate that up. There is a side benefit that I will sometimes talk to customers about, is that if you have your teams using the JHipster implementation, you start to get a standardization across the teams. So if you have, several teams building an app and you have several apps, maybe hundreds of apps, and you're all kind of using JHipster, then over time, you're kind of getting a standard for how those components are built and then how those components are assembled, which simplifies long-term lifecycle management. But Nathan, I don't know if you had anything else to add to that.
I think the short answer which you gave is no, you're not tied to JHipster. It's a wrapper, right? It gives you a way to plug it into Entando, right? But the benefit of using JHipster in Entando is some of those cross-cutting concerns, right? It's an old phrase, but old term. But you get authentication and composing larger applications with it. So you can keep using those skills that you already have, and you can tie them together in a new way and have more flexibility, right? So I just wanted to add that piece.
Yep.
So I heard you guys talking a little bit about, the use of Angular and React, but where does the Red Hat stack fit into all of this?
Want to take it first, Nathan, or I can take it?
A couple places I can speak to it a little bit, right? So Entando we've gone back and forth on whether we support every Kubernetes, right? But with Kube native, every one is a little different. So in the poll earlier, we threw out a few options, right? Red Hat OpenShift is one of the games, right? And we have a lot of customers on OpenShift, so that is certainly there. It's part of our ecosystem. Strongly support it. Encourage you to go from 3 to OpenShift 4 if you're not considering it already. But we're not tied to just that. So we also have clients spinning up on Google, AWS, Azure. So we try to support as much as we can there, and we're certainly in the Red Hat space for that as well.
Yeah. We also support multiple things in the Red Hat stack just from history in the interface. Red Hat OEM did Entando in the past. So we include Keycloak. Keycloak's the authentication layer. Keycloak's a very popular identity management layer, which can work with your existing identity management layer, so that's fine. They've also included the Drools JBPM projects, which is effectively the PAM project, and they have integrations, support with Wildfly JBoss if you want, but also the upcoming Quarkus would be supported in the future. Quarkus is the new Kubernetes native runtime, maybe that's the best way to say it, that would give serverless capability to Java applications. So you could build a Java app. Quarkus can start up 1,000 times faster than, say, a Spring Boot app. So you can actually build a Java application that's serverless. So that, and then other components like Fuse or Camel K are coming out there. And then a new thing coming out of Red Hat is this thing called Cogito, which is a process automation engine, a headless process automation engine. So we'll have that. But the reason why I was hesitant in that is we're also just an independent stack. You can build a micro front-end application and leverage anything from Tibco, Spring Boot, we obviously support Spring Boot, to other authentication layers, and then multiple Kubernetes deployments. And as Nathan said, the choice of Kubernetes, it's probably going to go the way maybe of app servers. Now I'm just talking history, that companies may have a chosen standard that, hey, we deploy on X, but they'll probably have multiple things in their environment. So even though a company may standardize on a specific type of Kubernetes, they'll probably have different things, different versions of Kubernetes spread throughout. They may be using Rancher for smaller projects or for getting started. So what our goal would be is just to be able to support all those. So we're trying to build ourselves as independent as possible, kind of like days of Java EE, build it as a Java EE application, and supposedly you can run all of them, even though all those different app servers are different. So that would be the idea. We have a strong relationship with Red Hat. Red Hat customers will be very familiar with the full stack we can provide, but we're also working across the board. And like I said, even Google in Europe is wanting to standardize on Entando as a layer. So we'll see. We'll keep ourselves independent.
That's really interesting, Paul. I see that you guys, when we took the poll, had quite an interesting split between folks who prioritize the UX when designing some of these different aspects of the front end, and others who use what's available. Sam, Highland, Nick, or anyone else on the panel have some thoughts on that?
So I think it's really important to, regardless of whether you're going micro front ends or not, I think it's really important to invest in UX work. I think you can see significant returns in the long run by investing upfront in UX, by building out patterns that really solve your users' needs. So I think that's really important. I think where micro front ends start to come into play is really the reuse of those components, because you can build up kind of a repository of those components over time, and you can take advantage of work that has been done in the past. But just on the UX front alone, I mean, we have seen significant return in an upfront investment in UX work. And Nick, and if you have anything to add, please jump in.
Yeah, I think just to kind of add on to what Sam was saying, I think organizations that have kind of gone down this road, most organizations will tell you they've invested in standardization somewhere, right? Whether that's using JHipster as an example for code generation, whether it's standardizing on just tool selection, library selections. Microservices and micro front ends, they're a great way to build, but when you're talking about large organizations, you still need to enforce some type of standardization across your organization. And so, having microservices doesn't change that need. At the end of the day, you still need to support what you're building, and you have capabilities within your organization that you want to leverage. And so, being able to build UI libraries, Entando has a native UI library that comes with a product. Being able to make sure that you're building code kind of the same way, using the same patterns, whether it's using, once again, the Entando toolset or JHipster. You do still need to invest in these types of standardization, and so that you can leverage. But to Nathan's point, like most organizations don't have just one standard, right? Large organizations have diverse teams and diverse skill sets, and they're going to want to create standards within those small teams, right? The React team is going to have their React libraries, the Angular teams are going to have their Angular libraries, and so on and so forth. So it's not about standardizing on one set of technology, because you still want that agility. But within each stack, you still need some type of standardization. You don't want to be building one-offs every time you build a React application, as an example. And so it is still very important to invest in those types of activities and those types of tooling. But you don't want to cripple your organization either and force a single standard across all your organization, because you're also then adding other layers of complexity to the way you manage, to the way you build. And so I think there is a fine line, but I do believe that organizations still need to invest in those types of activities. You just got to think about it in a more quote unquote micro way to really take advantage of the technology and where the industry is going.
Thank you, Nick. So on that same theme of like where the industry is going, what is the biggest, and I'm going to ask really each of you this, point in favor of going with a micro front end system on top of Kubernetes? Like, what would you say would be the top reason someone would want to do that?
I guess I'll start. I think I'll go back to kind of my points before, which is just organizations today need to be competitive. And in today's world, in today's economy, you got to find your differentiators, you got to find it fast, and you got to keep iterating. Most organizations aren't going to provide, their services change over time, customers' behavior change over time, and you got to be able to adapt. And so really embracing technology that is built to be agile, built to be Kube native, to Paul's earlier point. These are all key decisions that you got to make now. And at the end of the day, technology is still just technology. The real benefits is to the business. And are you getting that agility? Are you getting the capabilities to deliver and keep up to date with what's happening in the industry and the trends that are going on, and make sure that you're investing in your end user, and because ultimately that's what drives revenue.
Thank you, Nick. Nathan, any thoughts on that?
I don't have any new thoughts because I already kind of sort of answered that a little bit earlier, right, with agility, right? Business agility and customer first focus, right, all that. But I wanted to riff a little bit on what Nick was talking about. Um, I think we've made it sound like it's an all or nothing, that if you've got a monolith right now, you got to go all in on a micro front end technology, some stack that can handle all those things. I don't think that's necessarily the case, right? So I think you can get greater agility by adopting a more flexible framework and maybe starting to move, maybe your greenfield stuff goes to a micro front end technology, right? That you're using a platform like Entando to solve some of these goals. And you start thinking about how do we do A/B testing and be more agile in that way, right? And then you bring along older applications. One of the beauties of this kind of framework is that you can start putting a micro front end on legacy services, right? So you can start using it in ways that let you tie in. And some of the diagrams we have both on Entando's websites and that we saw in Sam's talk, they only show you like this box that's Kubernetes, right? And this is all the stuff that's in Kubernetes. But anybody with a real application is probably going to have some stuff in there that ties out to, oh, Keycloak is talking to LDAP, and this thing is talking to my enterprise relationship system, and this thing is talking over here, right? The actual diagram is more complicated. So you're not going to do a big bang, hey, we weren't MFE based, and now we are. You're going to be looking to get greater agility by moving to something that just gives you more options, and so you move some things over time. So sorry to derail your question a little bit, Sam, but I wanted to throw that in.
No, that's fine. That's good. I like it when you guys kind of, take it in different directions.
Which,
Paul or
well, Sam, this might
anything?
yeah, well, actually, I'll let Sam go, but there is a question we should do right after this, which is, if you're reutilizing those microservices that you've been building in the past, and you're kind of starting to iteratively migrate to this, what's the concept of backend for front ends, and how does that apply? Or what does it mean?
Yeah.
You guys discuss the backend
Yeah.
front end.
I'd love to hear the answer to that.
All right, well, why don't I answer the original question, and then let's get into the backend for front end piece. So, just looking at the big benefits for this micro front end approach, I agree with everything Nick said and Nathan said, and I think the one piece that I will just add to that is really it's the autonomy piece, and it's getting the right people making the right decisions about the right areas of your application. So your enterprise architect should not be concerned with the nuts and bolts of how the inner workings of that micro front end are working. They should be concerned with how the different services and front ends talk to each other, the communication that's happening on a larger level, how they're talking to those legacy applications that Nathan was talking about, that inevitably you're going to have. You may even have new legacy applications, because sometimes the build versus buy decision comes in and you need to buy something from a vendor and you don't control how that vendor works. But within each of your services or within each of your micro front ends, you're giving that team autonomy to control how that is built. Maybe sometimes there'll be alignment around standards and technology decisions, as Nick was saying, but even within those constraints, I think it's important to give those teams those decisions, both so you get, the best high performant applications, but also so that you get happy developers. And developer satisfaction is an important metric when it comes to team productivity. And now I'm going to pass the baton, and let's get into backends for front ends.
That's great. So from a backend to front end sort of thought process, Nathan, Nick, thoughts?
I can start. So my philosophy on backend for front end is it's a bit of a facade, right? So it's a way for you to control what your front end needs, right? Sometimes you're building a ton of stuff there, right? Because you've built a back end that your MFE needs, right? Sometimes it's just a bit of a shim to talk to your enterprise systems, right? But it lets you control the API and maybe massage data, do some transforms, right? Get it into the format that your front end needs, and then you've got this control layer on the back end. So for me, that's how I tend to think about that back end for front end design pattern.
Absolutely. Anyone else got anything to add on that?
I think Nick, I think you're muted, Nick.
I am, sorry. I don't think they're competing in any way. I think if you think about really what backend for front end is, you can, whether you're building, a web app, a PWA app, or a native mobile app, and you kind of want to split out the different user experiences between, well, sorry, not between, but using BFFs. You can still do that with Entando. You can do that with micro front ends, right? You can still view the micro front end, that organization of micro front ends, microservices, and so on and so forth as one stack. And within that, you can then also have BFEs that kind of expands that service line, right? So I don't believe they're competing. I think you can view the BFF architecture as supportive of micro front ends, right? You're really looking at a way to build application that allows you to kind of separate those user experience deliveries across that architecture, right? And so I don't believe they're competing in any ways. I think they're actually supportive, and ultimately they still rely on having infrastructure like Kubernetes in the background, microservices. So I don't, yeah, I think in my opinion, I think they're actually quite supportive of each other. You can almost view a BFF as a way to almost view micro front ends, right? You're just kind of splitting it between kind of the delivery experience, whether it's mobile and web. We're just looking at a more granular way of delivering a web, but you can still take that and kind of expand it and roll it out and still reuse kind of the microservices, the backends. If you're using PAM as an example and you want to leverage that across your BFF architecture, you absolutely can. So I think if you're going down that road, I don't believe this is going to be a big deviation for you. I think they're actually quite supportive, and your teams are probably already set up to really take advantage and embrace this anyway. So yeah.
That makes sense. Thank you. I heard one of you talk about happy developers. And so I was just wondering if there are specific developer tools that make happier developers as you're walking down this path, or, thoughts on that, like Spring Boot or NetBeans, or is it something that makes it easier, harder? What works, what doesn't?
So I'll get started, and then I'm interested to hear what the other panelists have to say. But for me, what I see makes the happiest developer is actually giving them some layer of control, because developers come into different environments with a particular tool set that they like, that they have refined over time. And the closer you can get them to using their preferred tool set, so whether it's certain development tools, certain text editors, or certain libraries that they like to use, the more flexibility you can give your developers, the happier they'll tend to be.
Yeah. I'll add to that. So that's a tool. Sorry, Nick. That's a tool side of it, which I think is absolutely true, right? I think one of the advantages of the architecture is also that they're closer to understanding how the piece that they're working on provides business value. And I've had a lot of roles over the years because I'm of an age, right? And always want to understand that what I'm building is going to matter, And happy developers want to write code, and they want to know that it's actually going to see the light of day, right? And so getting a smaller, cohesive team that's building features and is going to go live in 2 weeks, right? You're much likelier to get a happy development team when you do it that way.
Yeah, and that cohesive team is close to the business, and I think that's key there.
Yeah, I'll echo all those sentiments. I'm a developer. That's my background. So yeah, everything that Sam and Nathan said, but I'll throw in a couple more geeky techie stuff. For me, in my years of doing software development, I think things that I always hear annoys my coworkers, or whether it's myself, is working on legacy code. Nobody likes that, right? I'm still shocked at some of the things that I still need to look at for clients that are using code that's 15, 20 years that in languages that nobody even knows how to read anymore. So having to work with legacy code, having to work with quote unquote heavy tooling. I think I'll go back to kind of a quick example. Me and Sam Hyland, we were actually working for a pretty significant financial institution here in Canada about 10 years ago. And we're working on this project where we're building on this quote unquote monolith. And I think at one time we had probably like 50 developers, and we were just kind of doing some rough math just to kind of do some anecdotal numbers. And we were just calculating how long it took for a developer to restart their environment, whether it's, the quote unquote, the application, the database, so on and so forth. before they can even write a line of code, how many times they have to restart in a day, and just kind of anecdotally calculate how much time in a day does that eat away at a developer's productivity. And as a developer, as somebody who's trying to get work done, that is, that's going to annoy you to no end. And that number that we ended up just kind of roughly calculating was quite large, and we actually presented it to the executive team at that time that we're working with, and they were astonished at how much time, how much productivity was actually spent just dealing with environments. And so, it's kind of tie back into what Paul was saying at the beginning around this move towards lightweight. I think these are all things that drive not just kind of business value, but at the end of the day, you go to work every day, you want to bring value, right? You want to bring value, you want to show value, whether you're a developer, a QA person, a product owner. I think at the end of the day, we all want to go to work, and we all want to know that the effort that we're putting in is bringing some value to our team and our organization. And so being able to work in environments that adopt allows you to kind of adopt different technology. To Nathan's point earlier, if you can leave that legacy code in the back, you can leave that monolith in the back, and when it makes sense, you can look at whether it's refactoring that or gutting it and replacing it. You can make that decision at a time in which it makes sense for your organization. But allowing you to kind of adopt these newer technologies, these toolings that provide more productivity to you, your team, and your organization, I think that's key. And ultimately, that's going to lead back to happier developers, happier QA people, whatever that role is. I think people are just generally going to be happier.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, happy is important right now for, employee experience this season. Thank you all so much for your time today. We really appreciate you coming up here. Folks, we have another couple of webinars in this series. One will be August the 5th, and then the next one will be September 16th. So please do, check your email. We'll be sending out follow-ups with the new dates and information for you to register for those. And I'd just like to wish you guys a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. See you guys.
Bye, guys.